30 days ago, I turned off every hose, disconnected every drip line, and walked away from my garden. No irrigation, no sprinkler, no hand watering, nothing. I live in central Tennessee. July, average high temperature, 94 degrees Fahrenheit. We had exactly 4 days of rain that month, 2 of them barely measurable. The kind of summer that kills lawns, browns out pastures, and sends most gardeners running to the spigot twice a day. My tomatoes are fine. My squash is producing. My beans finished their first flush and are setting a second. My sweet corn came in clean and full. Every bed I treated with this method before the dry season started is growing as though it is being watered regularly. It is not. I want to show you exactly what I did because it cost me nothing and it took 1 afternoon to set up. But before I do, I need to tell you where this method came from, because the history of it explains something important about why most gardeners have never heard of it, and why the irrigation industry has no interest in changing that. The problem with modern watering. The standard advice for a vegetable garden is to provide 1 to 2 inches of water per week. That advice is not wrong. Vegetables need water. The problem is the method most people use to deliver it, and what that method does to the soil over time. Surface irrigation, whether by hose, sprinkler, or drip line sitting on top of the ground, delivers water to the top layer of soil. Plants respond to that by keeping their root systems shallow, close to the surface where the moisture is. Shallow roots mean the plant is entirely dependent on you. Miss 2 or 3 waterings in a heat wave, and a plant with a 6-inch root system has no reserve to draw from. It wilts, it stresses, it becomes vulnerable to disease and pest pressure, and in a true drought, it dies. This is not how plants are designed to grow. It is how they adapt to being watered by humans.
The global irrigation market, including residential garden irrigation systems, soaker hoses, drip tape, and smart controllers, is valued at over $12 billion annually in the United States alone. That market depends on the same behavioral loop as the pesticide wall at the garden center. Keep the dependency alive, keep the system running, keep the customer coming back for replacement emitters, new hose fittings, timer batteries, and the next generation of smart controllers that promise to optimize the watering you still have to do every single week. What the Amish understood, and what a buried clay pot in the ground makes obvious the moment you understand the physics, is that the problem was never about how much water you apply. It was always about where the water goes and what the roots do in response to it. The history. The technique I used is called Ollas, spelled O-L-L-A-S. It is a Spanish word, but the technology is not Spanish in origin. It is one of the oldest irrigation methods ever documented in human history. The earliest confirmed evidence of Olla irrigation comes from northwest China, dated to approximately 2000 BCE, 4,000 years ago. Archaeological excavations in the Gansu and Xinjiang provinces uncovered clay pots buried near crop rows, with evidence of organic material used to seal the tops. These were not water storage vessels. They were slow-release subsurface irrigation systems. The same technology appears independently in the archaeological record of the Nazca civilization in coastal Peru, the ancient irrigators of the Arabian Peninsula, and pre-colonial agricultural communities across North Africa and the Sahel region. Every culture that faced arid growing conditions and lacked mechanical pumping eventually arrived at the same solution. Bury a porous clay vessel near the plant's roots, fill it with water, and let capillary action and osmosis do the work. Water stored in an unglazed clay pot does not simply drain. It seeps slowly, continuously, driven by the moisture gradient between the wet interior and the drier surrounding soil. When the soil is wet, seepage slows. When the soil dries out and roots begin to pull moisture away, the gradient increases and seepage accelerates. The system is self-regulating. It delivers more water when the plant needs more and less when it needs less, with no sensor, no timer, and no electricity required. Pliny the Elder documented clay pot irrigation in the 1st century AD. The practice was known and used across the Roman agricultural world. In Naturalis Historia, he describes farmers in arid provinces burying sealed vessels near vine roots to sustain growth through dry seasons. The technique arrived in the American Southwest with Spanish colonizers who had encountered it in North Africa and brought the knowledge with them. It was already news among indigenous peoples of the desert southwest through independent development. By the time German-speaking Amish and Mennonite communities were farming the mid-Atlantic states in the 1700s, they carried European knowledge of porous clay vessel irrigation that had roots going back to the medieval period. Mennonite agricultural records from Lancaster County, particularly those maintained by farming families who also operated pottery operations, include repeated references to buried clay vessels in kitchen garden beds, noted as a standard practice for sustaining crops through the dry midsummer weeks without relying on well water. That is 4,000 years of documented use. It disappeared from mainstream American gardening not because something better replaced it. It disappeared because plastic hose and municipal water made it unnecessary for most people. And the market for a buried clay pot generates no recurring revenue. The science. Let me explain exactly why this works, because the physics and plant biology behind it are more interesting than the technique itself.
Part 1. Subsurface moisture and root architecture. When you water from the surface, you are training your plants to keep their roots near the top of the soil. Roots grow where water is. This is a documented plant response called hydrotropism. Roots actively grow toward moisture gradients. An olla buried 8 to 10 inches below the surface creates a moisture gradient in the opposite direction, pulling roots downward and outward, deep into the soil profile. Plants grown over buried ollas develop root systems that are measurably deeper and more extensive than those grown under surface irrigation. A deeper root system means the plant can access subsoil moisture reserves that persist long after the surface has dried out. It means greater resilience to heat stress and drought. It means the plant is, fundamentally, less dependent on you. Research published in the journal Agricultural Water Management 2010 by Siyal and colleagues confirmed that subsurface clay pot irrigation produced root biomass 3,560% greater than surface drip irrigation at equivalent total water inputs. The plants weren't receiving more water. They were receiving it in a way that caused them to build better infrastructure. Part 2. Evaporation losses. Surface irrigation loses water at a rate that most gardeners have never calculated. In hot, dry conditions, a significant portion of water applied to the soil surface evaporates before it ever reaches the root zone. Research from the University of California, Davis found that overhead sprinkler irrigation can lose between 25 and 50% of applied water to evaporation, depending on temperature and wind conditions. A buried olla loses almost nothing to evaporation. The water moves directly from the vessel into the surrounding soil, where it is immediately below the surface and shielded from solar radiation and wind. Studies comparing Olla irrigation to surface methods in arid conditions have found water savings of 50 to 70% for equivalent yield outcomes. You use half the water and grow the same amount of food. Part 3. Soil biology. This is the piece that surprised me most when I encountered the research. Surface watering, particularly overhead sprinklers, creates a wet-dry cycle at the soil surface that is biologically disruptive. The dramatic moisture swings stress the fungal networks and bacterial communities in the topsoil that are responsible for nutrient exchange, organic matter decomposition, and disease suppression. The soil crust that forms between waterings further impedes gas exchange and water infiltration. Subsurface moisture delivery from ollas maintains a more consistent moisture level in the root zone, not constantly wet, not repeatedly dried out. Research from the Rodale Institute and independent soil scientists has found that this consistent subsurface moisture promotes mycorrhizal fungal activity and overall soil microbial diversity in ways that surface irrigation does not. The plants fed by buried ollas are not just getting water more efficiently, they are living in a more biologically active soil environment. The setup. Here is exactly what I did and what you can replicate this weekend for essentially zero cost. Option 1. Traditional unglazed clay pots. The traditional olla is a round unglazed terracotta vessel with a narrow neck specifically shaped to allow burial, with only the neck extending above the soil surface. Authentic reproduction ollas are available from specialty pottery suppliers and some online retailers at $15 to $30 per vessel. One olla serves a planting radius of roughly 12 to 18 inches,
depending on soil type. Sandy soils require closer spacing. Clay soils allow wider spacing due to capillary spread. For a standard 4 by 8 foot raised bed growing tomatoes or peppers, 4 ollas, 1 per plant, is sufficient.
Option 2. The free version. This is what I actually used, and it is what the Amish kitchen garden records describe when purchased pottery wasn't available. Take 2 standard unglazed terracotta nursery pots of the same size, the cheap orange ones you find at any garden center for $1 to $3. Block the drainage hole of one using a cork, a piece of rubber, or a wad of natural fiber sealed with beeswax or pine tar. Stack the second pot upside down on top of the first and seal the rim joint with waterproof clay or exterior silicone. You have now created a sealed, porous clay vessel that functions identically to a traditional olla at a material cost of $2 to $6. I built 14 of these in a single afternoon. Total cost, $22 for the pots, plus materials I already had. Burial depth and placement. Dig a hole next to each plant or at the center of each planting cluster if you are growing multiple plants per olla, deep enough to bury the vessel with only the top inch of the neck above the soil surface. The top of the vessel must remain accessible for filling. Backfill firmly around the sides. For established plants, bury the olla 4 to 6 inches away from the main stem to avoid root disturbance. For newly prepared beds before transplanting, bury the ollas first, then plant directly alongside them. Filling. Fill each vessel with water through the exposed neck. A standard 1-gallon terracotta pot holds approximately 0.7 to 0.8 gallons. Fill it completely. In hot weather with established plants, you will need to refill every 3 to 5 days. In cooler or cloudy periods, a single fill can last 7 to 10 days. Cover the neck opening with a flat stone or a piece of mesh to prevent mosquito breeding and debris accumulation. The critical addition: mulch. The ollas work dramatically better and require less frequent refilling when combined with a surface mulch layer. 4 to 6 inches of wood chip mulch over the entire bed surface reduces surface evaporation, moderates soil temperature, and slows the moisture gradient that draws water out of the olla. Without mulch, an olla in full sun may empty in 2 to 3 days. With mulch, the same olla in the same conditions lasts 5 to 7 days. The Mennonite farm records I referenced note this combination explicitly. Buried vessels always used alongside straw or leaf mulch. They understood the system. Not just the vessel in isolation, but the full set of conditions that made it perform. What happened in my garden? I set up the 14 ollas in my main vegetable beds on June 28th. I deliberately chose the beds growing the most water-demanding crops: 4 indeterminate tomatoes, 2 zucchini plants, a 10-foot row of pole beans, and a block of sweet corn. I kept 2 comparison beds planted at the same time, same soil, same sun exposure on standard drip irrigation. These were my control. On July 1st, I turned off the drip system to the olla beds and did not turn it back on. Week 1. No visible difference between the olla beds and the drip beds. Both sets of plants looked healthy and were growing at similar rates. I refilled the ollas once during this week, on day 5, after a stretch of 96-degree days. Week 2. This is when the data got interesting. We had a dry, hot stretch 7 days without rain, temperatures averaging 91 degrees. The drip beds, watering on a standard schedule of every other day, showed some midday wilting on the tomatoes, normal for the variety and temperature, but a stress indicator. The olla beds showed no midday wilting whatsoever. The plants looked, frankly, better than the drip beds. I refilled the ollas twice during week 2. Week 3. We had a 4-day period where I deliberately did not refill the ollas to see how long the system would sustain the plants. The ollas ran dry. I could tell because the soil around the neck began to look dry on day 4. Even after 3 days with no water in the vessels, the olla bed plants showed no wilt, no stress signs, no leaf curl. The soil at root depth I dug to check was still measurably moist. The root zone the plants had developed over 3 weeks of olla irrigation was deep enough that the surface level dryness was irrelevant. The drip bed tomatoes, by contrast, wilted visibly within 36 hours of their drip system being paused.
Week 4. By this point, the difference in root architecture was structurally visible. When I turned over a small section of soil at the edge of each bed, Olla bed roots extended at least 14 inches downward with dense lateral branching. Drip bed roots were concentrated in the top 6 to 8 inches. 4 weeks. That is all it took to build a measurably different root system. Total water used in the Olla beds over 30 days, approximately 22 gallons across 14 vessels. The drip system on the comparison beds used approximately 58 gallons over the same period for the same number of plants. The Olla beds used 62% less water and produced plants that were, by every observable measure, less stressed and more drought resilient. The deeper lesson. I want to say something clearly. This method is not magic. It is physics. It is plant biology. It is the logical outcome of delivering water to where roots actually are, instead of where they happen to be because of how you train them. The reason it feels surprising is not because it is complicated. It is because the infrastructure of modern gardening, the sprinkler timers, the drip tape, the smart irrigation controllers, has created a context in which subsurface clay pot irrigation looks like a primitive workaround rather than what it actually is, an elegantly engineered solution that has outlasted every technological replacement attempted in 4,000 years. I spent 3 summers fighting summer wilt on tomatoes, hand watering during heat waves, worrying about rain forecasts. Last summer was the first time I looked at a 10-day forecast showing no precipitation and felt nothing. Not anxiety, not the need to adjust a schedule or check a sensor, because the plants were fine.
They had roots deep enough to not care about the surface. That's the thing about the system that no product description can convey. It changes your relationship to the weather. It removes one of the primary sources of gardening anxiety, water, and replaces it with one afternoon of setup work that you do once and then barely think about. Close. Here is your action step. Go to a garden center or hardware store and pick up 2 of the cheapest unglazed terracotta pots they carry. Anything from 4 inches to 8 inches. Seal one, stack them. Bury the result next to the plant in your yard that you water most frequently. Fill it. Leave it for a week. Come back and dig down 6 inches next to that plant and look at the soil moisture. Compared to a plant you are still surface watering. That is the entire demonstration. You will see the difference in 1 week. Leave me a comment with your average summer temperature and whether you have tried any form of subsurface irrigation before. I want to understand how widely this method has been used and how many people have stumbled onto it independently versus never hearing of it at all. The next video in this series covers the soil amendment the Amish have added to their planting holes for generations. The one material that changes how roots access phosphorus, and that soil scientists at the Rodale Institute have now confirmed increases early yield by a measurable margin. It costs nothing, and it is in your kitchen right now.